Let me show you something strange. July 14th, 1881. Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Pat Garrett walks into Pete Maxwell's bedroom and shoots Billy the Kid. That's the story. Everyone knows it. It's in every history book, every documentary, every Western movie reference. But here's what nobody tells you. The people who were actually there that night, they told three completely different versions of what happened. I'm not talking about minor disagreements. I'm talking about fundamental facts. Was Billy armed? Depends who you ask. Did he say anything before he died? One witness says yes, another says no. Was Garrett already in the room, or did he follow Billy inside? The official report says one thing, Garrett's own deputy says another. And all of these accounts were written within months of the shooting. Not decades later when memories fade, within months. So, if the people who were there couldn't agree on what happened, how are we so sure we know the truth? We all know the Billy the Kid story, right? Young outlaw in New Mexico, quick with a gun. Killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881 at Fort Sumner. Case closed. The story feels finished, settled. For most of my life, I accepted it that way too. But when you actually start reading the original documents, court records, territorial newspapers, letters from people who knew him, something weird happens. The story starts to fall apart, not because someone's lying necessarily, but because the sources themselves are fighting with each other. Let me give you an example that blew my mind. Billy the Kid's real name seems simple, all right? Historians today are pretty confident he was born Henry McCarty, probably in New York City. But look at what people called him during his lifetime. Henry McCarty, William H. Bonney, William Antrim. The court records from his trial in 1881 list him as William Bonney, alias Kid, alias William Antrim, in Doña Ana County criminal cases, 531 and 532. Even his birth date is contested. Pat Garrett's book, published in 1882, says November the 23rd, 1859. But other researchers found baptismal records suggesting September 17th, 1859. As historian Robert Utley points out, we can't even definitively prove where he was born. New York seems most likely, but we're working with fragments. And here's where it gets really interesting. The most famous part of the story, the part everyone knows, is his death. July 14th, 1881. Pat Garrett shoots Billy the Kid in Pete Maxwell's bedroom at Fort Sumner. That's the official version. Garrett wrote a book about it the next year called The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. It became the authoritative account. Here's the problem. Garrett's own deputy, John W. Poe, who was actually there that night, later wrote his own version of events, and it contradicts Garrett's account on several major points. According to Garrett, he saw someone he thought was Billy approaching Pete Maxwell's house and followed him inside. But Poe's version says Garrett entered Maxwell's house to question him before the person they thought was Billy even arrived. That's not a small difference. That changes the entire sequence of events. After the shooting, Garrett claimed Billy was holding a .41 caliber pistol. Poe said it was a .38 caliber. Some witnesses at Fort Sumner that night claimed Billy only had a knife. Even the location of the body gets disputed. Garrett's book says the body was carried to a carpenter's shop for a wake, but the coroner's inquest report conducted by Postmaster Milner Rudolph just hours after the shooting says the jury examined the body while it was still on the floor of Maxwell's bedroom. And here's what really haunts me about this. Both Poe and another deputy, Thomas McKinney, initially agreed that Garrett had killed Billy the Kid. But years later, both men reportedly recanted. They claimed Garrett had killed the wrong man. Now, most serious historians today dismiss this. They believe Garrett did kill Billy that night, and that the body was positively identified by several Fort Sumner residents the next day. But the contradictions never went away. They're still there in the official records, documented by researchers at the New Mexico State Records Center and Archives. Let me take you back a few years to show you how messy these records really are. In February 1878, a British rancher named John Tunstall was murdered by a posse that included men aligned with a corrupt business group known as the House, run by Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan. This sparked the Lincoln County War, one of the bloodiest conflicts in Wild West history. Billy the Kid was working for Tunstall at the time as a cattle guard. Accounts say he witnessed the murder from a distance along with ranch foreman Dick Brewer. Billy swore revenge, reportedly saying Tunstall was one of the only men who treated him like he was freeborn and white. Billy and other Tunstall supporters formed a vigilante group called the Regulators. They obtained arrest warrants and initially had legal authority from Justice of the Peace John Wilson, but the territorial governor quickly revoked that authority. On April 1, 1878, the Regulators ambushed Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady and his deputy George Hindman on Lincoln's Main Street. Both men were killed. Billy was wounded during the escape. Brady died from at least a dozen gunshot wounds. This is documented in territorial records and contemporary newspaper accounts. It's one of the few things historians actually agree on. What followed was chaos. A 5-day battle in July 1878 that ended with lawyer Alexander McSween's house being set on fire. McSween was killed as he fled the burning building. According to eyewitnesses, Billy the Kid burst out with bullets whizzing all around him and barely escaped. By the time the territorial government declared an amnesty in November 1878, 19 people had been killed. President Rutherford B. Hayes had to remove the corrupt territorial governor and send in federal troops to restore order. The amnesty pardoned most participants in the Lincoln County War, but not Billy. He still had outstanding murder warrants. Here's where the numbers get tricky. Billy the Kid supposedly claimed to have killed 21 men, one for each year of his life. That number became legendary. But historians today think the actual count is probably fewer than 10. In fact, he was directly linked to 9 murders in contemporary records, solely responsible for 4 of them, and may have played a role in 5 others alongside other men. The 21 kills thing? That probably came from Garrett's book, which was largely ghostwritten by Marshall Ashman Upson, a journalist from Roswell. Frederick Nolan, one of the leading Billy the Kid scholars, called that book a farrago of nonsense that's been responsible for every single one of the myths perpetuated about Billy the Kid. Most serious historians today view it as propaganda, written to justify Garrett's actions and secure his reward money. And that reward was real. On December 13, 1880, our territorial governor Lew Wallace authorized a $500 reward for Billy's capture. That's documented in the Territorial Archives of New Mexico, Roll 99, Frame 172. When Garrett killed someone he claimed was Billy the Kid 7 months later, he collected that reward. The state legislature formally approved the payment in February 1882. But here's what keeps the controversy alive. The coroner's inquest was rushed. It was conducted by Garrett's political allies. The body was buried the next day in an unmarked grave that later disappeared in floods. When researchers requested permission to exhume the remains in the 2000s for DNA testing, the city of Fort Sumner denied the request. In 2007, the amateur historian Gail Cooper sued Lincoln County under the State Inspection of Public Records Act to produce forensic evidence from a 2006 DNA investigation. In April 2012, they finally released 133 pages of documents. According to the official report, those documents offered no conclusive evidence confirming or disproving Garrett's version of events. They just confirmed the records existed and could have been produced earlier. Now let me be clear. I'm not saying Billy the Kid faked his death and rode off into the sunset. The claims by Brushy Bill Roberts in the 1940s that he was the real Billy the Kid have been thoroughly discredited. Family records showed Roberts was born in 1879, 2 years before Billy supposedly died. Most credible historians believe Garrett did kill Billy that night. But here's what bothers me. The evidence we base that conclusion on is shaky. It rests primarily on Garrett's own account, written by a man who had a financial incentive to claim the kill. A man whose deputy later contradicted him. A man whose book, according to scholars, is filled with fabrications. This brings me to the bigger question: why do these contradictions matter? Because they show us how fragile historical truth really is, especially for the Wild West. Lincoln County in 1878 had no centralized law enforcement records. Courts were temporary. Documents were lost or destroyed. Some testimony was never written down. The newspapers reporting these events were working with incomplete information, publishing quickly to meet deadlines, often relying on second-hand sources. And the people involved, the people writing memoirs and giving interviews years later, they were operating from memory. Memory shaped by ego, by loyalty, by the need to justify their own actions. What historians largely agree on is surprisingly modest. Billy the Kid was a real person. He was born around 1859, probably in New York. He operated primarily in New Mexico territory. He was involved in the Lincoln County War. He was convicted of Sheriff Brady's murder in April 1881, the only conviction secured against any participant in that conflict. He was sentenced to hang on May 13, 1881, but escaped from the Lincoln County Jail, killing 2 guards in the process. And someone matching his description was shot by Pat Garrett on July 14, 1881. Beyond that, certainty becomes harder to defend. As of 2025, only one authenticated photograph of Billy the Kid exists. It's a 2x3-inch tintype showing him wearing a vest, so a slouch hat, and holding an 1873 Winchester rifle. That photograph sold for $2.3 million in 2011. In 2010, a tintype allegedly showing Billy and the regulators playing croquet surfaced. Some experts claimed facial recognition software confirmed Billy's presence. Other scholars, including outlaw historian John Bosenecker, concluded the photograph doesn't show Billy at all. We can't even agree on what he looked like beyond that one verified image. The deeper I went into this research, the more I understood why responsible historians are so careful with their language. They say likely instead of certain. They acknowledge gaps. They resist clean conclusions when the evidence doesn't support them. That restraint isn't academic cowardice. It's honesty. It's intellectual integrity. When records don't agree, history doesn't collapse. It reveals its limits. And those limits matter because they remind us that the Wild West wasn't documented like we document things today. It was recorded by people living inside the chaos, under pressure, with partial information, and often with personal agendas. Pat Garrett wanted to be seen as a hero. Newspapers wanted sensational stories. Later biographers wanted compelling narratives. The truth got lost somewhere in between. Before we wrap up, I need to be completely transparent with you. Everything I've shared in this video comes from verified historical archives, court documents, academic research, and peer-reviewed scholarship. The New Mexico State Records Center and Archives, the Territorial Court Records, books by Robert Utley and Frederick Nolan, who are considered the leading scholars on this subject, are contemporary newspaper accounts from the 1870s and 1880s. I've listed every single source in the description below, with links where available. This isn't speculation or theory. This is what the actual records show when you read them carefully. The contradictions I've pointed out aren't my interpretation. They're documented disagreements between eyewitnesses, official reports, and historical accounts. I'm not here to sensationalize. I'm here to show you what historians actually work with when they try to piece together the past. Maybe the most important thing Billy the Kid's story teaches us isn't who he really was. It's how easily confidence can outpace evidence. When the same story gets repeated enough times, it starts to feel like proof. Uncertainty disappears, but when we go back to the original records, to the contradictory testimonies, to the rushed inquests and the missing graves, that uncertainty reappears. Not as failure, but as part of the truth. And sometimes admitting what we can't fully know is the most accurate conclusion history allows.